just coming up with ideas and I just want to contribute however I can possibly contribute.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. And I love having this diversity. It is so important to me to have all sorts of jobs and ages represented. And so, okay, so with that, I'm going to then turn it over to Shannon because she had some interesting updates, I think. I don't mean to put her on the spot, but she's nodding her head, so I guess she's okay with that. If you remember last week, one of the things we discussed was sort of where we overlap with land use and where we overlap with transit, where we overlap, housing is, you know, sort of an overlapping issue. And so Shannon had some good meetings last week and I'm gonna let her pick up there.
Sure. So one of the things we've been talking about is long-term how to create accountability. So after these recommendations that y'all make are adopted or not adopted by City Council, how do we deal with long-term accountability for those? And we've been talking about kind of a general accountability committee that would oversee all of them. But I've been doing more research in a lot of the communities that struggle with traffic and student housing and affordable housing like us. So I'm thinking Chapel Hill, Blacksburg, Virginia, Athens, Georgia. They have separate housing, basically a housing advisory board or a housing affordability board. And they also have a separate traffic board that work a lot like Clemson's. Let me see examples that we have. We have a business and economic development board. I think we now have a parks and rec board. So there would be 2 additional boards at the city level. They would work much the same way. Residents could sign up for 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is to be on that board. But those groups would be the ones that would kind of hold City Council and staff and the Planning Commission accountable for moving forward on these specific areas. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that moving forward, and if that's the type of recommendation that this committee would like to make.
I thought it was a good idea, but I would add, Shannon, I mentioned, I think it was, and I forget, maybe Elaine's discussion, this might be a place where membership could be determined by districts so that we could ensure that we had representation across our community. And Elaine, I thought this would be a really interesting way to bring in those neighborhood representation that's so important.
This could.
That's coming from the comp plan and some of the strategies included in there about having a council of neighborhoods is what it was called. But what I found in looking at the way things are divided out on next door wouldn't be an effective way to do it, because in many instances, because sometimes it's just a matter of 3 or 4 people in a little pocket who have set up their neighborhood as part of next door. And then Todd has another drawing that he sort of kind of did some dividing up of areas. And so I was thinking, you know, if we've got 32 neighborhoods, whatever it is, and you have 1 or 2 representatives from each neighborhood, then you've got a massive council that I don't think you're going to get anywhere with. So my thought was, and I sent this forward to a couple of council members, but I never heard back whether they were interested in it or not. If we're going to do that, do we want to do it with the idea in mind that at some point we will change our council structure instead of just being citywide? Right now, there are 3 council members who live in my neighborhood, and that's the 2 on either side of College Avenue downtown. So half the representative is from essentially one neighborhood. So I'd like to think of some way we can better spread that out, and we may not go with district representation on council at this point, but I'd like to kind of keep that in mind. If that's something we move forward, it's better to go ahead and create districts now that would be adaptable to something like that than set up boundaries now and then have them all changed and when they decided to do that.
Before we get that deep, Catherine,
Okay.
you mind if I share my screen?
Go for it. Let me make sure you can. Hang on. Make you a host.
Okay.
Oh, no. Sorry, I'm not giving up all my power. You can be a co-host.
Okay. Let me pull up. This is, y'all let me know if you can see this. I kind of sketched out what it could look like. I looked at some other of like affordable housing groups. And this is basically what they look like. So they're a little bit different than what Elaine was talking about. It wouldn't necessarily, although of course it would be great to have representation from all over the city. These are people that are going to be more really focusing not just on their neighborhood. So this is different than the neighborhood plans that we talked about. This is more of an overall city plan. So in some of the, like the scope of works that from other communities are, well, you can kind of see them here. Basically, they're making recommendations to City Council and Planning Commission for housing policies. So bigger than just neighborhood plans. And that this would be regional. We keep talking about expanding who we work with. And because we are, small and we touch all these different areas, what I like is in some of these university towns, they actually have a university representative on there. So we'd have a staff, city representative on there, but then also folks that represent Central, Pendleton, and Seneca. And this is really today just something for y'all to take and think about. We can talk about it more next time, but this is out in the shared drive.
So who would make up the voting part of this?
So that
I
we'd
see
have
your
to decide,
liaisons.
right? We'd have to decide how many people you want. I think on most of the other boards, it's limited. I think it's less than 10. But just like the other boards, you could have it kind of represent. So for business and economic development, for example, they have small business owners, but then they also have other folks on there too. You have residents that don't have a business. The Arts Commission they have slots for different types of people on there. So we could determine that going forward. I really just wanted y'all to think about this type of structure and see if you thought, next week we can talk about if you think this is something for accountability for your recommendations going forward.
So this wouldn't preclude having a following through with a council of neighborhoods either that would kind of be representing the neighborhood citywide, or you see it?
You could still do your council of neighborhoods if you want.
Okay.
But this would be a smaller group that really is focusing more in depth on policy.
And this is in with item number 3 or so on our agenda. So this will work. I like the idea of talking about policy. And I think that helps people get, that'll be and what Elaine's saying to me is that's the rub, is getting people to step outside of their neighborhood perspective. I'm not saying people can't do that, don't get me wrong, but especially as we get some of these massive neighborhoods, it's going to be, I see that being a challenge 5 or 6 years from now when we have Patrick Square and the Grange or whatever that is, the Grange, and all of those places logged with us. So it'll be interesting to see.
Right. So that's the one thing to consider, maybe adding, or maybe you make your recommendations that we've already discussed to this point, Catherine. We can take those to the implementation committee this week, but then this might be an additional one that comes on after you've had a chance to discuss it and flesh it out a little bit more.
Are you guys meeting Wednesday morning? I know Bob's out of town.
We are still going to meet Wednesday morning.
8:30.
That one is at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, like I just mentioned with this housing advisory board, lots of other university towns are having the same issues that we have, and they've also done a lot of exploring and research on them. So in the share drive, I think I sent y'all, there's a page that has links to different affordable housing strategies that other groups have gone through, their development processes and things like that. One that I would really like y'all to look at is what Athens, Georgia did. They put together an amazing plan. If you have time to read through it, I think it would really help this committee. If you don't, just skip to the end and look at their implementation when they talk about implementing things. One of the things they recommend, which other cities have done as well, that I don't think have really discussed in this committee, is incentivizing affordable housing developments. So I know staff already started to put together some language around this, but doing something like, so student housing is profitable, we're going to have student housing. How can you get affordable housing out of student housing? Other cities have done things like say, okay, if you set aside 10 units or 10% of your units for affordable housing, and these are the rates we're going to tell you they have to be set at, then you get these other incentives. You can either have higher density, you can have different parking requirements, we can look at your setbacks. So you're incentivizing them to contribute to the fund. So either by having those units on their site, or in lieu of that, paying a fee per unit, and they would pay that fee into a city fund that the city would use to develop or maintain affordable housing at other sites.
Yeah, we've been talking about this, guys, for a while about these fees, and with mixed results. I think that, and I know that Shannon's going to disagree, and that's okay, is the idea that I'm not sure how much we have to give up in terms of, people already want this, but yes. So take a look at that. Gundy, Eden, we'll make sure that you guys have, make sure that I have your email. I do have your email addresses, I know that. But I will make sure that you guys get added to the list so that you have access to the shared drive and to the documents.
And keep in mind, we can't just straight require them to have 10% because that's considered, or whatever number, that's considered inclusionary zoning, and that's not legal in South Carolina. I saw that term in Georgia, so maybe it is, maybe it's different there.
You can't require them, but you can offer it to them.
With some incentives, like, yeah.
Incentives. So it's not that you're requiring that any student housing has this. What you're saying is, hey, if you'd like these extra perks, this is how you can get those extra perks, is by potentially doing one of these other things.
Do you know what Charleston, I think, Catherine, you might have an idea, what's Charleston doing with their projects, that they're generating a boatload of money by doing something like that?
They are, and I need to look and see if they are required. They are, like you said, they can't quite require it, but they are saying if you don't do this, then this is the fee. I do not know what they are offering in terms of that. So that's a question I've not gotten answered. It's been a little hard to track somebody down there, but let me add that to my list.
Anybody else have questions or comments? Don't let me and Catherine and Shannon do all the talking.
As far as those incentives, what would those look like?
Well, one of the discussions, for example, is a higher density. So I'm really not in favor of the setbacks, but Shannon's right. I don't think we even have the setbacks anymore. But so for example, I'm going to try to make sure that I do this right, and y'all can correct me, is the current density issues for housing are pretty strict. And so we can let you go to a higher density within a zoning range if you agree to do this. I forget the numbers exactly of what the density levels are. So you could squeeze more people and get more money out of your same square footage.
Other cities have done things like waiving different fees depending on if they have program fees or impact fees or other fees. I don't know if that would be as much of a benefit to Clemson, but that is another way that they have looked at doing this.
Yeah. So that's one of the things is people want to make more money and have a higher density, and this is one way to sort of let them have it.
We have one program currently, Melissa, that's not exactly like this, but it's similar, that it's a parking reduction incentivization, where every time you build a parking structure in a garage, it costs about $25,000 on average per spot. And so we, in the city, we require one parking spot for every bedroom, I believe, if I'm up to date on that. And so there, for example, there's a program where if you're within walking distance of campus or within a certain distance, you can not have to build parking spots if you contribute a certain amount of that savings you have to a fund for public transit or some other kind of public use. So I think could be similar to something like that, where essentially the developer saves money and some of that savings goes back to a fund or to investing in other, in this case, housing. So you'd have to spend some of those savings on housing that they might not build otherwise.
Any other questions? Okay, Shannon, I think this is great. I will go into the share drive and make sure that kind of everybody has it in their hot little hands. By the way, one option that Elaine and I've batted around is if there is interest, like for example, in the Athens issue, is we could always schedule a road trip. You know, Athens is all of an hour and 15 minutes. And so we can always do that, and we can get some speakers. So that may be something that I'll look into, is seeing if somebody would like to come from Athens via Zoom, not come here, and talk to us and kind of give us some ideas of how well it's worked, and give us.
I'd like to get Jessica Fernandez's impression of that, since she was, when she was in Clemson, she was on the planning commission.
Oh, okay.
And she's a planner, so she's on the faculty at UGA now, and she and her family have moved to Athens. So I can reach out to her and see if she's got any insight from her perspective.
Yeah, the only person I know there's in the MPA, not planning. Okay. Shannon, do you have anything else for us?
Nope. The only other thing I wanted to do was gauge y'all's interest in having a joint meeting with the land use group, some sort of work session, or joint meeting with them, probably in June.
We need to understand where they're coming from and where they're headed, because I don't
Okay.
know that much.
Okay. And then just Catherine, for you to let me know, are we good with the recommendations? Do you guys want me to take those to the implementation committee this week?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So we have a lot of these that are, you can tie to, I don't know if you've looked at this, Shannon, but you can tie to goals and strategies in the comprehensive plan that are already there. Like number 4, where it says ensure funds are included to address legal, financial, and neighborhood needs. We've got strategies that apply to providing assistance with deed searches and understanding code for residents, for dealing with heirs land, which in our minority communities is a big problem, because it may end up with, 3 or 4 or 5 or more cousins, gets passed down and spreads out. So it becomes very difficult if the person living there wants to do anything to it. So that's one of the things that we've got. I spent some time a while ago looking at some of this. So I know we talked about purpose-built student housing as its own category, but land use is doing that. Is that right, Shannon? They're primarily looking at that.
They are looking at that this Wednesday.
Okay. Continue to utilize and strengthen the rental housing program as a tool for mitigating the encroachment of student rental into single family neighborhoods. And this is almost 2 parts, because there's that part, and then there's another place in there where we talk about creating some sort of database, an accurate database for consensus on student housing capacity and planned occupancy, because we don't know, I'm not sure if we have an accurate count on the number of beds or anything like that. But I want to go back to the rental housing program, if I can take a couple of minutes and tell you about that, because I think that's when Catherine and I met with Todd on Friday, we talked about how that program could be strengthened. And in the past, we've been told that the program depends on reports from residents about if there are concerns about trash or too many cars parked in or potential occupancy violations or any of that. So in my opinion, the perception has been that when residents report things, and whether it's real or not, it's the perception that when things are reported, it's viewed as kind of a complainer coming along, and things that aren't real conducive to people being willing to continue to do that. So 2 things, the My Civic app is going to be very helpful in that. And we talked about how you get to that form to file concerns, and there's too many clicks. It was buried several layers. So I think they're going to work on bringing that where it's easier to find. And then I also asked about, at one point we had a file online that was available to anybody that was a list of the rental houses in the program, not a person's name, not who was living there, not even whether they were students or not. It was just, this house has a rental license and this is what the occupancy limit is. And that's a fluid document. So when I got one in September, by October, there could have been changes in or additions added to that. But my point was, if we have that, and one of our other strategies is working to build neighborhood watch programs, and you just tie that all together and let the neighborhood watch programs help monitor whether the students or whoever are being, it's not necessarily students. There's one in my neighborhood right now that's keeping a very large utility trailer parked in the yard, but he lives somewhere else he's moved in, but he's using that to move slowly. And he just goes back and forth, and driving through this neighborhood, this charming little house with a not very big front yard has a huge utility trailer parked in it. So I've asked about it and they checked on it. So, but if I didn't, I'm not sure they would have noticed that. So that's just one thought. If we want to think about providing recommendations about how we might want to, because that's one of our things. How do we strengthen that?
Well, so you covered a couple of things there. So strengthening the rental housing program. Okay, so guys, we met last Friday, and one of the things that we've struggled with over the past several years is getting that accurate count. So we know obviously we can find the university numbers of who lives in Clemson, Pendleton Central, local addresses. That is 80%, 85% accurate. They were horribly miscounting the numbers of Tri-County Tech students who live in Clemson, like by 3,800. And so one of the questions is how could we use that information? And what is the best way for us to get that kind of information? And I know Chad had some thoughts, because I know Chad, as a landlord, you have to register, but you don't have to list how many renters you have, do you?
Well, the occupancy is set.
Yeah, so you have the occupancy. Okay, so we have occupancy.
Yeah, so if it's no more than 2 unrelated is what the ordinance says now, but there are some homes in our single family neighborhoods that are grandfathered in with 3, 4, and even 5 unrelated people.
Okay.
So that could, if you don't know which one that is, you might be kind of concerned that there's a bunch of cars parking there and coming and going. And the concern was with the chief police, with Chief Dixon, was that people would then know where students lived, and they would target those for theft when the students were gone, like for break or Christmas holidays or whatever. And that's where the neighborhood watch came in with me. If you work with the neighbors, you could all work together to protect everybody's property.
So if we have address, occupancy, and then guys, the question here is, to me, as far as housing policy is concerned, is what information do we need to help develop policy answers that we do not have? And would this help you if we had more information?
Did we have any before?
We have always had what I would call somewhat sketchy information based on some calls the city would make and a few guesses here and there in terms of university population. So I would put the accuracy at about 50%.
Question, excuse me. it was mentioned when Elaine was speaking, and I want to make sure I'm clear. When Elaine, you was speaking, you was saying that reporting like things that needs to be done to the housing or apartment, and it's because the African American community feel like it's not going to be taken care of. Am I correct? Something in that nature.
What that would mean, Rosa, is if I have a rental property on Folger Street, and that's the one I'll use, and the occupants are parking cars in the front yard. Well, that's a violation of code. If they're not cutting their grass and it's getting knee high, that's a violation of code. Or trash in the yard. At some of the student houses they'll have a big party and they just throw their beer cans and whatever down where they are, and they might not get around to cleaning it up for several days. And there's some things in the ordinance that says if they do that, they have to have it cleaned up the next day and that kind of stuff. So it's more that than it is somebody's house needs to be fixed up.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Rosa?
Yeah, because see, that right there, I'm in total agreement. Because it does something to the property and to the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it affects all, and especially children that may have may not their income, they may be paying the bills and just barely making it. But it also sets a precedence for, to me, I'm just speaking what I see or know. It sets people up for to be targeted in more ways than one when it comes to racial barriers. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's a good comment. I mean, that's what we're trying to understand. And like all of us, we don't want people abusing the rules and the policies that we put in place. So we definitely need to think about the best and worst case scenarios.
Because when I was on Vista, I had my daddy old car. I didn't think nothing about it because I still had the tag on the car, right? I was still paying the insurance, but I wasn't driving it because, okay, I mean, you know, I wanted to sport around, but that was not a sports car, you know. So it was during the time, I believe, Chief Links was in the police force. And they politely sent someone out and gave me a warning. Well, of course, I forgot about the warning. Okay. Because I was taking care of everything like I normally do. And I got the second one. It was not a warning. It was an $800 ticket.
Wow.
And yes. And then the rest of it explained what could happen. And I immediately picked up and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. You know, I had to take care of business. So, and I also understood because I worked with houses back then with Chris Hefner and a lot of other people that I tried to help get old cars and stuff moved out of the neighborhood because of the fact it brings the property value down. So whether you're renting or you purchasing a home, you know, you didn't move to be Fred Sanford, the slums. I mean, not that he was the slums, but I'm just using that scenario. So I kind of agree with some things because that's the reason we got trash. But the problem too that I had back then in Clemson, they wasn't coming through the neighborhood to pick up the trash. Mattresses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they wasn't coming through because I've been on Central up here and I'm like, what days y'all work? And then they know my voice now. You know what I'm saying? Because we got a problem over here, you know? And then when you leave it around, especially at times like this, you got all kind of creatures that's coming out during the day and the nighttime, you know, and just stuff. So I agree, but it's twofold. That's one way the city could get money. And we'll be happy to take the extra money through the Shaw Center. So I'm just plugging it in. Okay, but thank you.
Okay.
So the current rental housing policy, for the most part, only applies to houses in the R12 and R20 neighborhoods. I don't know, it's broader than that. Chad's shaking his head, yes, and then no, and then yes.
It's broader. It's kind of crept. It was originally R20, R12, but I don't know how they're applying it, but it's an RN4 as well.
Okay. And I think that's one of the things we do want to keep our city beautiful. And if there are people who need help, Rosa, maybe that's a way we can look at expanding some of the things when the Shaw Center gets real wealthy and we have lots of money to do things, we can
You know,
help with those things
I'm
as
game
well.
for whatever to make it better. I'm on
Yeah.
the game, okay?
Okay.
I'm not speaking for Rosa, but I do think looking at how it's happened in other towns all over the place where code enforcement, everybody who doesn't agree with code enforcement, oh, we want to keep our city looking beautiful, who wants a car out front, but if it's not applied equally, and also if investments aren't made at the same time in the same communities that you're enforcing those codes on, you're putting an undue burden on the people who have a lot of code enforcement violations to fix, you know? I don't know. I think that, I'm not sure if that's what you're saying, Rosa, but that's kind of my take on it too, is that we have to be careful of wielding the big code enforcement sword. And then at the same time, for decades, we hadn't really invested in a lot of places, and we're expecting, everybody to all of a sudden live up to it when the city hadn't been picking up trash and hasn't been
Correct.
investing in the streets. And I think it's just, I can see why you can say it's two sides of that.
Right.
Yeah, well, I guess we need to find a happy medium, because we in my mind, if we have codes and they're not enforced, then why do we have codes? So. But anyhow, that ties, I'm sorry, Shannon, I know I got a little off track again, but that does tie to one of the objectives, some of the objectives that are on our list.
And I think that's another area, if you want to maybe discuss today, what area you want to dig into next week, whether it be kind of that affordable housing or the housing advisory board, or maybe it's the rental housing policy. I do have a copy of the city's rental housing policy out in the drive for y'all to look at. We could look at that and see how you might want to add to it and strengthen it.
I would like to propose kind of a double focus, which is that number one, I want us to prep for the land use meeting, because I want to know, we need to think about where that overlaps. And I think that comes up with the discussions. We've started tossing around, even beginners like Lillian and me have started tossing around things like overlay districts, like we actually kind of know what we're talking about. And and yet, and I think that's part of our concern. Like we sort of talked about this kind of hold on high density student housing as being addressed in an overlay district. And so I think we need to prepare for that discussion a little bit in terms of where the land use group has gone with that, making sure we're there. And then the other thing that I will send out to everybody, I'll take responsibility for this, is that using that rental housing policy in terms of generating a census of what we have in terms of and how we could get better information. There's a couple of things numbers wise that are making me happy of building that kind of database and seeing, what's out there and what we can do better, because I believe numbers could help us develop some better policies.
And also thinking if you want that rental housing policy to apply to purpose-built student housing as well, to the large high density developments.
Yeah, to me it should, but
so how to word it and add that to the policy.
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, yeah.
So what I'll do is for next Monday's meeting, I will give you all an overview of where the land use and development group is. We'll work through what their recommendations stand and where they're at. That meeting will probably be, I'll send some times out to both groups and we'll see what we can do in June to get both groups together and do that.
Are we meeting this coming Monday?
No, you have a week off. But hey, let me give you something amusing. So while we were sitting here talking, I could pawn this off on somebody else. I have a message from Zoe Richardson of the Anderson Independent talking about the ordinance on residential zoning and commercial districts. And the developer's negative reaction to this. I should stick John Fulmer on them. John had some very creative terms for it. Mine makes mine look tame. But anyway, I think that's part of it, is we need to have a response for some of these developers, and we need to because the concern, let me just tell you quickly, the concern from council's perspective, we have a few, but one of them was the last thing we should leave for our, whoever takes over after us on our committees, on our commissions, in our community, is that 7 years from now, there is vacant, tall, ugly concrete buildings that have no real use other than student housing. And that is a big concern of where we're coming from. You know, even small houses, you can always turn a house is a house, but these student housing components, I almost think I need to go see a few more of them. I haven't seen some of the uglier ones. And so that's it, is that I don't think that 10 years from now, are we really going to look at these things and go, oh my God, I really wish I had lived there when it was new. I mean, yeah, what are we going to say about them? So it is demand, it is supply. And we need to come up with, as John said in our council meeting, next should be coming up with better recommendations that benefit everybody. So that's where we're coming from on that. So anyway, okay, last but not least, we got 15 minutes. One of the things I wanted to ask that we talked a couple weeks is, what information would you like to see? And Elaine's done a good job. Shannon's got a lot of stuff. What other information do y'all need? Could you use that would be helpful? I'll get you the shared drive links, making sure somebody asked to get that back out. Oh, Chad, what's your name? Okay, yeah. What else do you guys need or want?
Shannon, it might be helpful to pull out the goals, objectives, and strategies for implementation in the housing element. It's a 60, 70 page chapter. You could put the whole thing and direct them to a page that starts on page 52. And then there's about 64. So there's about 12 more pages that are just the strategies and objectives, but a lot of those are matching up with things we're talking about. So that's a good thing if it's already part of the strategic goals from the planning commission. That, but if there are things we're talking about that are not in there, we may need to go back and amend the comp plan in that area to make sure they sort of match up once we get through with what we move forward.
I'll pull the comp plan parts and put that in the drive for you guys. Also, once Catherine sends me the revised document today, when that goes to the implementation committee, that will also go to staff, and they look at it and say, yes, this is in the comp plan, this is different here. And so they give us that feedback as well at the same time.
Yeah, council, I'm not sure I could tell you any one particular priority. We are making progress on the purchase of the land at Berkeley and Issaquena. Andy, I'm waiting on him to tell me that he got in touch with the owner of that land. Chad, we'll see how that is progressing. But I'm trying to be patient, and that is not a virtue that I possess.
So what is the plan with that? Sorry, I don't know about that.
Man, I'm sorry. If you missed the meeting, and Eden, the land at the corner of Issaquena and Berkeley.
That lowland.
Yeah, that floodplain. I talked to Chad. This is at an intersection for the Green Crescent Trail. It is right at a critical juncture for the Green Crescent. It is adjacent already to Ashley Deering. I've advocated that the city should purchase it. The asking price is $350. It's 4.5 some odd acres.
That without the house or with?
The house. He's only selling it as a single flat. Chad had some early discussions with her. Where we are now is May 11th. The South Carolina Land Conservation Bank Trust came and had a good meeting with the engineers. It turns out that Clemson is a high to medium priority area for them. Big surprise, guess what? To preserve land. Imagine that, the things that we're trying to think about. So the next steps are that we do the final application to the Conservation Bank. They would pay up to 50% of the purchase price. We have to come up with the other half. Our mayor has said he'd probably be willing to go up about $75,000 is what he might be willing to kind of push for the city to pay. The rest of us have different thoughts on all sorts of things. But I do agree that we would do some fundraising and work with the community foundation to try to come up with that funding. So, and all of it is about timing and the willingness of this nice old lady with some relatives who are not as nice to play ball with us and be willing to sell it to the city. Otherwise, there are going to be 8 houses on stilts in that low-lying area.
Yeah, there doesn't need to be any houses there.
Nope. So that's where we are on that. And we are talking, one of the things we're talking about, and I will have, when we talk to Bob, Shannon, I don't know if you've heard him talk about this. And there's stuff out there, he and I think found it at the same time. Charlotte has some interesting things that they work with their community development corporation almost as an investment strategy. So they would go to people and say, if you invest with us to buy land and conserve land and do all these good things, I hesitate to use the word guarantee, but we will work with, get you a 3 to 5% return on your investment. And so they really do it as an investment for people who don't need, want to do a good thing and get some return on their money. So Bob and I've had a couple of those conversations, and we're going to have more. Maybe that's a way to use the community foundation in terms of kind of that community development bank. So I hesitate to use words because I don't want any bankers to like yell at me for using the wrong term. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. But that would enable us to buy some pockets of land. Maybe if another 2 acres came for sale or another 5 acres came for sale, that would enable us to kind of literally bank our land. Chad, did I get that right?
Yeah, you did well. There's one other, this might be relevant indirectly to the housing group, but the Parks and Rec, there's a, right now, I think there was a different council resolution that passed that PDs can now have parks as one of the uses instead of commercial. And I think it's a really good thing. That one of the challenges is, my wife's on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, is that the Parks and Rec department is really being stretched thin in terms of being asked to do things like even this land, this green space. Isn't it wonderful that we have more green space? And yet Tony Tidwell and a lot of the parks maintenance people have to maintain these spaces. And there's also just an idea like what's the goal of Parks and Rec? We're kind of expanding it with 12 Mile Beach. And so I'm just putting that out there, is that every good idea has implementation challenges. And one of those Parks and Rec is just figuring out what Parks and Rec is all about and what the mission is, and who that, they serve a lot of different constituencies. And so that's just, I don't know why, maybe I'm just talking to Catherine about that as well, but that's just
No, you're right.
Challenges to try to figure out, is integrating how these, and maybe there's a more natural component of the Parks and Rec, which would be pretty cool, to maybe have a natural space part of the parks that doesn't have to be maintained as much and is kind of minimal use. Maybe that could be used at Nettles Park as well. It sure costs a lot less than having to cut fields and cut down trees and do all that. So I'm just throwing that out there as another challenge to kind of putting all these pieces together.
Have a bunch of happy agriculture majors if you could do that kind of stuff and loop in the university.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It is. And one of the things that actually and again, we're kind of crossing over. So I promise not to only do this for 30 seconds, but because I don't know if Chad knew this, is one of the things Bob asked me to do, because I work at Tri-County Tech, and I had a conversation this morning about starting an associate's degree in PRTM to kind of start bringing some people on, that do entry-level stuff and kind of help build even the population of people who are doing that. So, and they were really open to it, which was a good thing. So, yeah, we can do that. But yeah, just think about how much, I like cutting my grass, but I'm not sure I'd like cutting that whole 4.5 acres that's down there in the floodplain. And it's expensive. That's just it. The equipment, I think Carrie was telling us in the budget presentation, Chad, those, you guys probably know, maybe, tractors are not cheap. And the stuff to haul them around in, and it does. So it adds to our base.
Salaries too, just paying people. People are stretched thin.
They are gonna, last I checked, they are gonna get the personnel that they requested. So that is something where I think most of the council, I'm speaking for everybody here, but most of the council is all in favor of anything that for Parks and Rec, because we want to get people out and doing things and enjoying where we live. So Okay, any other words for the good of the order? Thank you, Eden, for sending me your email address, making sure I have it.
I just want to ask Shannon, do you have the final version of our list of
No,
recommended
don't.
actions?
no,
I
she'll
need you or Catherine to send that to me.
not send it. Unless Elaine wants to.
I don't think I have I don't know that I have the final one. I did not write anything on mine last week, so I only have the one that we got last week, which is already in the share drive.
I'll do it. I will do it. I have a whole list of notes and hopefully a night without counsel just to sit and do.
Yeah. A free evening. So we're not meeting next week.
You guys get a day off. I figure it's the least we can do. I also don't know if anybody saw this. It was on Nextdoor. Is that the Clemson Corps of Cadets is doing a Memorial Day thing.
yes.
I don't know if celebration is the right word. On the 30th at 4:00. I will try to find out information and make sure that it's posted everywhere.
Do you need anything else from us right now, Shannon?
Nope, I was just going to let you know the implementation committee will be meeting. They're meeting via webinar Wednesday morning at 8. If any of you want to listen in or join in while they listen to your recommendations. And then
Yeah,
that land
I
use
want to
group,
make sure of.
the land use group meets in the same webinar, but they log on at 8:30. So if you want to join in, it's the same group of people on both committees, just some extra folks on land use. So we use the same webinar for that. So if you want to start listening into that conversation, see where they are with overlays and catalyst areas, you are welcome to do that as well.
I will make a note. Wednesday, my mornings tend to get really busy. So all of a sudden 8:00 has come and gone, but I'm going to make a note to be there.
And I'm on that committee, so I'll be there.
Yay.
How can we access that information and be able to join in on that webinar?
If you go to the city website under the meetings, there it should be listed probably as ClemsonNext Steering Committee or as ClemsonNext Implementation Committee.
Okay.
And there's a link that you click, you fill in your name and information, and they'll send you a link to the webinar. So the webinars are a little different than the WebEx. So you'd be able to join and watch. And then if you want to make a comment or something, if you raise your hand or put something in the chat box, then one of us can let you in, but it's a way to control because that committee has gotten big.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a big centipede. Yeah. But yeah, Wednesday morning, bright and early. I figure we can listen in with coffee, and I will get all of this out to you guys. I need to do a better job, and I'm going to get back on track to sending you guys notes. So thank you so much, Chad. You know, I'm so grateful you're doing this because as a landlord, that's just wonderful, wonderful. And I don't know if you saw Gundy's note. He picked our first meeting for his wife to go into labor, so he had to leave and go to the hospital. So that's as good of an excuse to leave a meeting as I've ever heard. So anyway, and he's very excited to be a dad for the first time.
Eden, do you have any questions for us at this point? And Bill, you've been awfully quiet today too.
That's always scary.
No, I'm good. I'm just excited to be able to kind of get into the drive and dig around a little bit and see a little bit more. But other than that, everything's good.
Awesome. Okay, Camper. Yes,
the only thing I'd have to say is that the land use committee, there are a couple of people have brought this up and during their meetings, and maybe Eden could speak to this at another time. But I worry about whether we are hearing from enough constituencies about what the needs are for housing in this town. Okay, and I'm not quite sure what to do about that, but anyway, there's some worry about if you have the catalyst areas or the overlay areas, what happens to graduate students? What are you doing to them? Okay, is a real housing issue in my mind.
So they have had discussions about graduate students in particular in some of these catalyst areas, and affordable housing for all types of students. So I know that has been discussed for some of these areas.
Okay, good. That's good to know. I know that we talk about it and then we forget about it, move on to something else. You're right. Okay, campers, thank you so much. And let me know if you guys need anything else.
2 weeks. We meet again in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, and we will have information for you between now and then. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.